remember the day clearly, the day when it all went downhill. The morning sky was filled with fog. You could see the sunrise trying to peek through the smoke that filled the air. From my view, there were blossoms covering the field, slowly dying, because they didn't get much sunlight. Everything was soon to be stomped over by the hurrying feet of angry men and innocent women along with children. Everything was going to happen so fast, fast as a stroke of lightning, and we never even knew when it was going to hit us. That day, I had heard many screams from different individuals, all running, trying to escape. I saw my mother and father in a blur because of all the tears that filled my eyes and dripped down my swollen, rose-red cheeks. What were they trying to escape from? The danger and the attacks that were taking place. I was just a young child, huddled into a ditch with many other children, all scared, lost, and terrified. We were all hiding from the people that were sacrificing our friends, family, neighbors, and all the people we loved and cared for the most. Me being just a young child, I couldn't take a stand, nor could I stop them. Many people were killed because of this attack. Everything went from dangerous and thundering to peaceful and silent. I shut my eyes and saw everything that occurred all over again. The events were playing over and over again in my head like movie credits rolling upon a screen. I heard the screams of terror in my head. I saw everyone around me again, suffering with pain and torture caused by the foreign men, and myself not being able to do anything about the warlike event taking place right in front of me. Looking around at my surroundings, all I saw was puddles of blood and many elders laying on the cold, muddy ground, not breathing or moving the slightest bit. It was raining by this point, and it smelled like slaughtered dead bodies drenched in blood and cold water. I felt the cold, hard raindrops hit my head and slowly fall down my face. I was scared and hurt, trembling with fear. I didn't know what was going to happen now. I was all alone in the middle of a war of blood and gore. I focused on the other kids, some younger and some older, but they all sat there crying for help, not being able to do anything. We all stayed near one another, at the very spot for the whole night, lurking upon the people who died during this time and feeling no hope at all. I sat there motionless, almost like a zombie. I had tear stains on my cheeks and a broken heart that would never be healed. I noticed how the older siblings were hugging and keeping the younger siblings warm, and how the younger siblings were latched on their brothers and sisters. During all this time, there were many wars between Japan and the West. The shogun had come to consider that the foreigners were a threat, as well with the Christian God, churches, and missionaries. He wanted all Christian missionaries to leave the country as soon as possible. Many churches were destroyed, and the shogun had made many new rules that people were forced to follow. Many Japanese Christians and almost 70 missionaries were killed. It was all a very chaotic mess, like a maze with no way out. Many missionaries still came into Japan and disobeyed the shogun's rules. They disguised themselves as traitors. The shogun had realized that nothing could stop people from coming into Japan, so he set the idea of isolation and having laws. The shogun wanted us, the Japanese, to live in a society that showed what was important to us. This is why he isolated. He wanted to keep Japan in peace, harmony, security, and safety to ensure no rules and laws were broken. The shogun wanted everyone to realize that they had their places in society. Also, the shogun had set very strict laws. He did not want any Japanese to go aboard, and if they did, they were forbidden to come back. Many foreign items were not allowed into Japan. The shogun destroyed all the large ships, and no large ships were meant to be made in Japan. Also, newcomers were not allowed into the country. All these laws and rules were meant to keep Japan safer and more controlled. If you broke the shogun's laws and disrespected them, you were to get killed. Europeans were being expelled from Japan, but Dutch traders were still allowed to stay because they were more interested in trade, not religion. Even though the Dutch were allowed to stay, the families of the Dutch traders were not allowed to join them. The shogun had many strict rules for them as well. This was the time in history in which the shogun increased the power of politics and had massive control over people of Japan. Much, much later. I was sitting outside, getting some fresh air and realizing all the things that had happened in these past years. I could never forget the day where my heart was torn and when I saw my family die right in front of my eyes. It's so crazy to me how time has gone by so fast and how far I've come. Japan has always been under war and violence. We always had threats from the West about isolation. Today was important to me. It was the day that the shogun petitioned me to take over power and to take his place. From now on, I will be the one to make rules for others to fulfill, and I will be the one to make large decisions. A different and new era in Japanese history was bound to happen. There was lots of civil war going on. War between two different groups with two different opinions. This war was between those who wanted to restore the shogunate and those who favored rule by me. I hated being in between this. I hated how people were fighting. Soon enough, the country was divided into two because of this rivalry. I didn't know how I felt towards all of this. It reminded me a lot about my past. In the past, as an emperor, I lived a pretty lonely life. I lived in the imperial palace in Kyoto, which was well hidden from others in Japan. In the end of all this war, I had all the support. I was not alone for any longer. I had 30,000 troops supporting me. The shogunate had been restored. I was now the leader of the country. It felt crazy how I suddenly became leader of this country. Japan just came through violent and difficult issues, and I am placed to keep it peaceful and war-free, to keep the idea of isolation going. In this time, the government had finally noticed the importance of having an emperor. Meiji leaders began the transformation of Japan by emphasizing that allegiance towards me forms a stronger nation. Our first step was to move our imperial court to Tokyo rather than having it remain in Kyoto. After all of this, my perspective on isolation is that it is good and that it should continue on. I say this because it has taught me many things. It has taught me to be independent, carefree, and it has made me feel safer. Isolation should go on because it is war-free and safer. The Meiji period. One early morning, I saw many large ships arrive. It was a shocking sight. They were roaring and sailing their way up towards our land. What were these large ships doing here? I heard many people screaming and hiding from these ships. All the fishermen pulled in their nets from sea and ran towards shore. Everyone ran from outside into their houses and hid, because they were frightened by these large ships. There was steam coming out of the ships and they were very advanced. Once I figured that, I knew these ships were of American. Andor Perry had arrived. He was an American. I had a feeling that Perry wanted us to end isolation and open towards trade and working with the rest of the world. Americans had come before this time as well, and this meant danger. Perry had 2 steamships, 2 sailing vessels, 977 men, and 66 guns. Perry had a larger amount of people and more ships. He had become more advanced than ever before. Every other year, Perry came back and had more troops and ships, and then we signed a treaty with Americans. This treaty opened 2 Japanese ports to American ships. The Japanese had lost control over their trade. Japan had become open to the rest of the world. This was the end of isolation.